When the drone operator James sent his UAV soaring over the forests of the Nevada test site, he could never have imagined he would see something that would make his heart stop. He was looking for abandoned buildings and rare wildlife shots, but he stumbled upon something that was meant to remain forever secret. On the screen, a strange structure suddenly appeared, half buried in the earth, as though someone, or something, had tried to hide it from the world. There were no trails or tracks around it, and the site was far from tourist routes or official research stations. James decided to zoom in. The surface of the object resembled rusty metal, but through the cracks he saw some kind of tubing, as if it were part of a machine or installation. He marked the coordinates and sent the footage to his friend Mike, a biologist who had been studying mutations in the test site area for several years. The response came instantly and with urgency. "Are you sure this isn't a fabrication? This could be a lab." The next day, they met at the edge of the restricted zone. Despite the risk, the two decided to venture there themselves. Along the way, Mike explained that he had recently come across a mention of a top-secret experiment allegedly conducted in the Nevada forests before nuclear tests began. All he had managed to find out was the project's name, the Belmez Protocol. He didn't know what it entailed, but all data about it had been destroyed soon after a disaster. The closer they got to the site, the stronger the smell of dampness and rust became. Strangely, even the birds were silent here. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Finally, they arrived at the structure. The metallic construction indeed looked like a partially collapsed facility, possibly underground. James began filming while Mike examined the door leading inside. Unexpectedly, it creaked open with little effort. Inside, the darkness met them, filled with thick, oppressive air. The beams of their flashlights illuminated peeling panels, broken equipment, and glass containers filled with murky liquid. One of these containers was cracked, and nearby on the floor lay a black viscous substance, almost alive. Mike noticed a rusted plaque on the wall with nearly erased text that read, "Genetic experiment, access prohibited." He was stunned. It was evident this wasn't just some lab, but a place where the very nature of life had been tampered with. Suddenly, deep in the facility, a peculiar sound echoed. A muffled rustling, as if something were dragging itself beneath the floor. Mike's flashlight wavered as he turned sharply, but he saw nothing. However, James kept recording, and his camera captured movement. Something swiftly slithered across the floor and vanished into the shadows. Deciding they'd seen enough, they turned to leave, only to realize that the sun was already setting, even though they had been inside for no longer than 20 minutes. Time seemed to be moving under different rules. On the way back, James began reviewing the footage. In one frame, a creature was clearly visible, something between a worm and a snake, with a translucent body and glowing eyes. It seemed intelligent, and certainly did not want to be found. They had no idea they had only scratched the surface of a much larger mystery. The real horrors of the Nevada desert were just beginning. After returning home, James couldn't find peace. His hands trembled as he rewatched the clips. The creature captured on video moved too deliberately, as if observing them, as if it understood. He tried to upload the file to a server to share with Mike, but the internet started acting up, and then the file mysteriously vanished from the disk. Only a black image remained and distorted audio that sounded like whispering. Mike, having received only fragments, insisted on a personal meeting. The next day, he came to James, recounting that he couldn't sleep all night. He kept having the same nightmare. He was standing in that same laboratory, and in the liquid shadows, something whispered in an incomprehensible language, calling him by name. But the strangest thing wasn't that. Upon waking, he found dark spots on his skin, like burns, precisely where he had touched the containers underground. Trying to understand what they'd encountered, Mike reached out to his old professor, Dr. Thompson, who had once worked on classified projects at the site. After listening to their story, the professor turned pale. He didn't deny it. Yes, in 1984, the Belmez program indeed began. Its goal was to create organisms capable of surviving under any conditions, even during a nuclear war. But something went wrong. The creature bred in the lab went out of control. The site was sealed, and everyone who worked there disappeared, officially written off during the tests. In truth, nobody knows what became of them. The professor warned, "If you found this place, it didn't open by accident. It's calling." James felt a chill inside. What if they had become part of something unstoppable? That evening, Mike didn't get in touch. James went to his house only to find the door ajar. Inside, everything was in disarray, and on the wall, as if clawed, was the message, "He's back." In the corner lay Mike's phone. The camera recording automatically played. On the screen was his room, then a noise, and then a dark figure with an elongated face and eyes glowing in the dark. The creature reached for the camera, and the video cut off. James realized things had become too serious. He couldn't go to the police. Who would believe in a genetic creature from a secret lab? He decided to return to the zone alone to find out what happened to his friend. Re-entering the forbidden woods, he felt the air grow dense, pressing on his chest. He reached the entrance to the underground lab, but everything was different. The entrance was gone. Where the metal door had been, trees now stood, as if they'd never been cut. Yet, from beneath the ground, a faint hum persisted, the same one he'd heard through his headphones during the initial drone flight. James found a crack in the earth, emitting a dim light. He took a shovel and began clearing the way. After an hour, he uncovered a small passage. Beneath him lay a corridor once more, but now everything appeared different. The floor was covered in something organic, pulsating, and at the center of the corridor stood Mike. His eyes were white, his skin pale, but he was breathing and said just one word: late. Whatever was beneath the test site had awakened, and James found himself at the heart of a nightmare from which there was no waking. James froze, staring at Mike. His voice was hollow, as if coming from another world. His friend's face, familiar yet alien, showed no emotion. In the next second, Mike stepped forward, and James realized this wasn't just shock. Something had changed in him on a fundamental level. He was no longer the person James once knew. "You shouldn't have come back," Mike said. His voice echoed through the organic corridor, and a strange movement began in the walls, as if the dungeon's very structure responded to their presence. From the shadows behind, Mike emerged two human figures, but with overly elongated limbs and empty eye sockets. Their bodies were covered with scars and something like moss and fungi, as if they were part of this living structure. James backed away, trying to comprehend what was happening. Then Mike made a strange gesture, and the figures stopped. "I control them, Mercy, for now. This isn't a disease, James. It's evolution. It was hidden here out of fear, but now it's awakened and chosen us." At this moment, the ground beneath them shook. From the depths of the dungeon came a roar like that of a giant creature. The ceiling began to crumble, and James, barely maintaining his balance, dashed forward past Mike. But instead of stopping him, Mike whispered, "You'll return." Everyone returns. Emerging to the surface, James gasped in panic. Everything he saw, everything he felt was beyond reality. But the true horror began when he reached his car and realized that his compass, phone, and GPS were not working. An unusual silence surrounded him. Even the birds were silent. The road he had traveled was gone, replaced by a dense forest that hadn't been there before. He tried to walk aimlessly, but it seemed each step only brought him back. After an hour of walking, he found himself at his car again, as though the forest was looping around him. Then he understood. He was no longer alone. Silhouettes flickered among the trees, distorted as if reflections in a warped mirror. He pulled out his camera, hoping to capture something, but the screen remained black, as though the lens gazed beyond comprehension. Finally, he saw a path that hadn't been there before. It led to an abandoned cabin barely visible through the fog. James rushed toward it desperately. Inside, it smelled of dampness and death. The walls were adorned with photographs, yellowed with age. On one, he saw himself next to Mike, but the photo looked like it was from the 80s. On the back was a date, May 13th, 1985. His heart pounded. That couldn't be. He wasn't born then, yet his face was identical to now. Beneath the photo was a penciled note. The cycle repeats. It always returns. Suddenly, something moved by the window. Someone was watching him. James darted outside, but there was no one. Only a message carved into a tree beside the cabin. You won't leave until you remember. What was he supposed to remember? Why was his face on a photo from the past? Fragments of dreams or memories began surfacing in his mind. He saw himself in the same dungeon, only in different clothes, with a different name, as if this had happened before. And then he realized perhaps the Nevada test site isn't just a forbidden zone. It's a time trap, a place where memories, reality, and identity are confused. And he was not the first to come here, perhaps not the first to escape, but definitely the first it chose not to let go. James didn't know how much time had passed since he found that cabin. Day turned to night, but the forest seemed to defy time. The sky remained grey, formless, as if this space did not belong to the usual world. He sat by a tree, clutching the old photograph bearing his likeness. Everything inside screamed, "Run!" But where? The forest wouldn't let him go. Suddenly, he heard a familiar sound in the distance. A motor. This was the very drone he lost at the very beginning. It flew over the trees, hovered for a second directly above him, and began descending. James rushed towards it as if it were his last hope. When the drone landed, its screen suddenly came alive. It played a video, not just footage of the forest, but a live broadcast from the underground complex. Only now the camera viewed from within, and James was in the frame. He stood in the same room where he first saw Mike, but it wasn't him. Now there was another James, with a cold, detached expression, and he spoke. "You've been here before. You're part of this. It won't let you go because you're the conduit. Without you it remains sealed, but you opened it. Now pay." James dropped the drone as if it had burned him. He gasped for air, his thoughts in chaos. What if he truly wasn't here for the first time? What if everything he remembered about his life was just a mask imposed on him by this place? He ran blindly, not discerning the path, and suddenly, light. A flash like lightning tore across the sky, and directly in front of him, an enormous crater. At its center, biomaterial pulsated, alive and breathing. From it, a figure slowly rose. It was Mike, but no longer human. His body shimmered as if woven from flesh and metal. He spoke in hundreds of voices, and all of them were James's. "You are not who you think you are. We are fragments of one consciousness. Once, you were a scientist who worked on this project. You wanted to open portals, harness the energy of the Nevada anomaly. But something went awry. Space-time tore, and you remained here, fragmented like a mirror. Each time you return is an attempt to restore yourself, but you continue making the same mistakes." James fell to his knees. Everything he knew about himself was shattered. He realized he had been here dozens, if not hundreds of times. Each time the site accepted him. Each time he went through the same stages: loss, discovery, escape. But he could not leave until he remembered who he really was. "How can this be stopped?" he croaked. The entity that had become Mike approached. "You must go back to the beginning, the very first time. There, where you first awakened it. Only by destroying your first version can you break the cycle, but you won't dare. Suddenly the ground beneath began to crack. Everything shook. From the earth burst warped metal structures, twisted like arms reaching for the sky. The site was contracting, time spiraling. Then James realized he needed to leap into the crater's heart, into that living, pulsating core where perhaps his consciousness first fractured. He stepped forward. Everything inside screamed with terror, but he had no choice, repetition or the end. And as he plunged into the biomass, the sight darkened. All disappeared. No noise, no pain, no thoughts, only silence. And within that silence, a child's voice. "Are you ready to remember?" James opened his eyes. He was once again in the same laboratory where it all began, but everything seemed distorted, like reflections in a funhouse mirror. A strange vibration hung in the air, and shadows fluttered on the walls, as if memories of the past. He tried to remember who he was, but the more he tried, the more muddled everything became. Suddenly an image appeared before him, the very version of himself he needed to destroy. It wasn't just a memory, but a living entity he must confront. They stared at each other, two halves of a whole. And James understood. By destroying this doppelganger, he could break the endless cycle of repetitions, but would lose part of himself forever. Abruptly, the shadow began to speak. Its voice was cold and mocking. "You fear losing yourself, but in that fear lies your weakness. Without me, you won't be whole, but with me, you'll remain forever trapped in this nightmare." At that moment, an explosion sounded beyond the walls. The laboratory began to crumble. James realized time was running out. He mustered all his willpower and moved toward his double. The struggle between them began, not a physical battle but a mental one. They wrestled for control of consciousness. At the critical juncture, when it seemed the shadow would prevail, James recalled a detail, something hidden deep within his memory. It was a signal he had recorded and concealed to help himself return. He activated this signal and felt the shadow begin to dissolve. But then the unexpected happened. The space around him exploded with blinding light, and James found himself on the brink of the real world, but with an altered reality. Everything around him was familiar yet distorted, as if he had entered a parallel version of his life. A place where the test site's experiments never occurred, but the cost was too high. People forgot about the danger, and a new catastrophe was already brewing. He realized his struggle wasn't over. He must warn the world to prevent an even greater disaster. His knowledge, his experience, was the only hope. Now he was not just a victim of the past, but a custodian of the future. James slowly rose and stepped into the new world, ready to face all challenges. The Nevada test site was left behind, but its secrets would always haunt him. For deep within each of us lies something inexplicable, and sometimes our darkest nightmares turn out to be true. The story of the test site isn't just about experiments and destruction. It's a tale of survival, the power of the human spirit, and how even in the darkest places life finds its way. The question is, are we ready to see what hides in the shadows? Do not fear exploring the unknown. Sometimes therein lie the most important answers. Did you enjoy this story? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. Give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to not miss new releases. See you soon.